For those that don't know, for heaven's sakes, why would you be here if you didn't know? But Frank Shorter was the inspiration for Mr. Tommy Leonard to begin the Falmouth Road Race when he won his Olympic gold medal in Munich, Germany in 1972, and the European Track and Field Championships were just held there this past week. Frank and I had several long conversations. I did an article for Tracksmith about Frank's memories from Munich 1972, and that was they did a very nice job on that spread. And it was great just going over that. I'm sure you've told that story so many times, but not everyone's heard it before. One of the questions I asked during that time when we were talking was, did you have the understanding of the impact? I mean, the running world has always been a close-knit kind of bubble, a circle with the athletes, but there's a larger world watching. It was the first time the Olympic Marathon was live on ABC television with Jim McKay, the great sportscaster, and Eric Siegel, who was a professor that Frank had at Yale, who was the author of Love Story, which was a very famous movie in 1971, Ally McGraw, Ryan O'Neal. And it all grew out of that. Tommy watched that on television at the Brothers Four Lounge, got inspired. But Frank, go back to that time and just your understanding of here 50 years later, here we are, and this whole sport has grown up around that catalyzing moment.
Yes. And I think what happened was we runners at the time were a family. And even then in 1970, 71, the Greater Boston Track Club was starting to get organized. The Florida Track Club was organized. There was a group out in California called the Southern California Striders. There were several little pockets of running communities where some of us would go and join them because we all wanted to get better. And we all found out that we trained and got much better more quickly if we cooperated in training, worked with each other, and helped each other. And then we also found out that when the race came on, Bill will tell you, we tried to beat each other's brains out. And then you get done and you go back to training. So I was part of that group. And I was very fortunate to have a very good group in Florida with Jack Batchelor, Jeff Galloway, and then I made a very good friend my first race in college at the U.S. Championships, Kenny Moore. Yeah, so we became, and to just give you an example of how it sort of bloomed, and I'll get into and how Bill eventually came into it as well. And by the way, as an aside, Bill was smoking probably while he was watching the 72 Olympics, and we had competed against each other when we were both in college. And so we knew each other, and Bill looked at me and said, I can do that. and eventually, so in that first race, and I get chills when I think about it, it was the National Championships, 10,000 meters, Miami, Florida, 1969. And Jack Batchelor from Florida finished first. I'd gone down, and I had just come down from college at Yale, and then fourth place was Kenny Moore. Third place was Kenny Moore, and I finished fourth, and the second place finisher was from Mexico. So the first two would go to a traveling team overseas. I was fourth, but I got to go because Jack had to go back and finish his studies in entomology, his PhD. And so we all started at that time, but if you look the full circle, in the Olympics, in the marathon, in 1972, 3 years later, Jack, who won the race, was ninth. Kenny, who blew by me in the final straightaway, was fourth. And I was first in the Olympic marathon. You know, and that kind of thing, that's where it all kind of started as we supported each other. And the way I want to answer your question is, any one of us we felt could do it. And we all worked together so that perhaps one of us might emerge from that. And I think we became a very good example later for Craig Virgin, who's also going to come up here and talk. You could see that's what you did. Craig went to Illinois, and he would run with people like Mike Durkin. I have another Mike Durkin story. And again, they had their running group at Illinois after that. And so I was just the one who emerged. But I think the overall understanding with everybody was we'd all train, we'd all work together. For instance, in the Olympic trials in 1972, Kenny Moore and I agreed to tie and win the race with each other not really sharing the lead the entire way, because the objective was to get to the Olympics and then see how everyone could do. So no, I had no idea what was going to go on after that.
When did it first, when you came back to the United States, what was the first time where you said, oh, this has really made an impact?
I think it was actually several years. And I think road racing, yes, there was an interest. And that's why races like Falmouth and you know, the Bix race and others who were in that first generation of races. You know, the Manchester Road Race had been around for a long time. There were some other races, but those initial races, there were a lot of things coming together, including my having done well in the Olympics. But I think the other thing, and I hope I don't get too academic here, it was when fitness was first quantified by the exercise physiologists in the early 1970s, end of the 60s and the early 70s. And I said the other day, I don't mind saying that one of the first studies that started to show that came out of Harvard. And it was a long-term study of their graduates to see how fitness affected them. Then you had Ken Cooper, who coined the term aerobics. He was working down in Dallas, and he was really the truly first exercise physiologist to put people on treadmills and see what the training effect was. So people knew he was quantifying the fitness, so that in his book he said, yeah, you do this much and your health will improve. And you could do the Harvard step test, which were their long-term study of their graduates to see how exercise impact people over decades. So it was a confluence of events. And so, yeah, and I think the other part of it, and then I'll stop because I've been going on long enough, is that people like Bill and I, we wanted to stay running. We didn't want to do the normal path, which was have your Olympics, go home, go on with the rest of your life, and there was no way to support yourself or to do anything, and we decided, no, we don't want to do that. And so I think our staying in the sport and the fact that I think you could say for the first half of the 70s through 76 maybe, I was sort of the focal point, and then from then on, Bill was the focal point. And then the other fortunate part was we could compete against each other, and he usually beat me, but every once in a while I could beat him.
There actually wasn't much of an overlap. I mean, you were the first half of the decade, and Bill was the second half.
I hope and all it took was one question, then I'm ready to go home.
That's why we love you. Well, I'm going to bring Joanie up. Joan, come on up here. You grab Bill's microphone. There's another one. You talk about first. Frank and Sarah. You can hang around, Frank.
All right.
It was, if Frank did it, here. If Frank's 1972 victory in Munich was the catalyzing event for men, it was really the pioneers, the women who got the marathon for women into Los Angeles in 1984 was hugely important, great impact. But once the stage was given, somebody had to take advantage of it. And the women in that race in LA were the best in the world, still icons in the sport. And Joanie's the one that won the race. And the other thing that's fairly similar is that Frank took the lead at 15 kilometers in Munich, which is very early for a major marathon to take the lead. Joanie took the lead at like 5 kilometers in the women's race, because I remember the first mile out of Santa Monica was like 6-minute pace. And Joanie went out there and struck out, and everyone thought she's gone out too hard, she'll come back, and she never did. And she set the Olympic record, which stood for many, many years. Joanie, did you guys, when you were out in Santa Monica that day, was there a sense of the history that was about to happen, irrespective of how the results are going to be?
Well, I think Frank has a prelude to the whole breakaway or the setting of the
I want to
stage.
say something early on and let her go. I took you aside after the London Marathon, right? In what, 82? Yeah, London Marathon, 1981, after the race, and Joanie was there with her mom, and you'd taken the lead, and you were running out front, and I was doing the TV telecast. And I went up after the race, and I said, you ran just the way you needed to run. You got past at the end. So here we are, Olympic marathon. I'm doing the coverage. I'm in the motorcycle, and they take off, and I think it was closer to 2 miles. I don't know. It was really early on in the race. Joanie takes off, and Ingrid Christensen and Greta Weitz are behind her, and they don't go with her. And I said on air, I think they're making a big mistake. So, you know, I knew because I'd seen you. I'd seen you before, and I'd watched you race, and I knew you had the ability to sustain it. And the other thing, what I think, and then I will truly shut up for the rest of the thing, you're dealing with your injury before that, where you're in bed with a hand ergometer, maintaining your pulse rate and doing your training, maintaining as much aerobic fitness as you can while your leg's healing. That's
historic.
Well, thank you, Frank. And, you know, it was going to be hard for me to disappoint in LA because Frank was doing the color commentary, but Bill was on the little motorcycle right in front of me, as close as the two of us are right now. And I couldn't say a word to him. Bill and I knew each other pretty well at that point in our careers. And if I had started a conversation with him, I would have been disqualified. So to have Frank doing the commentary and Bill being right in front of me, I mean, we were closer then than we are right now. And how could I not rise to the occasion? So anyway, but I had watched these two run in Montreal, and we did not have a lot of role models in women's running way back then. So these guys were my role models. So to be here with them in Falmouth 50 years after the first Falmouth Road Race started by the great late Tommy Leonard, and to have been together through the better part of my career is very meaningful to me every time I connect with these two. So, you know, it unfolded as Tony said, and what I didn't know was, to you who are old enough in the sport, Jim Fix, who had the runner's logbook for years and years, had predicted my win before he died. So the day before the actual Olympic marathon, Jim's widow somehow tracked me down. This was before cell phones, and I was staying with a family in Santa Monica, tracked me down to tell me that Jim had chosen me to win. And there I was with two of the greatest marathoners in the world, the late, great Greta Weitz and her teammate Ingrid Christensen. And then the woman who I'd seen on my last training run, who I had no clue who she was, but was surrounded by an entourage of people. Come to find out later, it was the great Rosa Moda. And
the 88 champion.
Who won the bronze that year. Greta won the silver, and then Rosa went on to Seoul to win the gold there. So, as Tony said earlier, it was really before the emergence of the African athletes. There were some African athletes there, but not a lot. But it was Norway and England with Priscilla Welch and Joyce Smith.
Joyce Smith, yeah.
Smith,
Priscilla was sixth at age 39.
So I had nothing to lose because I wasn't the favorite, and everybody discounted me after the knee issues. And so I just went out and ran the way I felt. And the history part, it didn't really affect me. It was more like being on home soil and not wanting to disappoint the nation that was hosting the Olympics. And I really felt like I was running Boston, which is in my backyard, and I felt very much at home in LA on US soil. So the fact that I didn't have the pressure that Greta and Ingrid had helped me. I remember Life magazine had done a big issue on the Olympics, and they had initially wanted a feature story on me in the magazine, and then I had the arthroscopic knee surgery right before the trials, and they totally discounted me. And I remember there was a little inset of me in a Lan's nightgown in a rocking chair sipping tea, and that photo added fuel to my fire as far as wanting to come back and prove that I wasn't, you know, a little drooping wallflower.
Joanie, did you ever get did you ever come to a point in the race? So what did you always just look forward? Did you have any sense that somebody might be coming, or were you in your rhythm to such a day that you looked great coming into the stadium? It didn't ever look like you faltered, But was there any critical or crisis moment in the race for you?
No, I was holding on to a little bit because I couldn't believe that Greta and Ingrid and this other woman, Rosa Moda, were in the race. I'd never looked back in a race. I did look up at the helicopters. I was trying to figure out how much distance there was between the helicopter hovering above me and how far the helicopter went back to the chase pack. And it was a fair distance, but you know, I just ran my own race, and some of the Frank called it right, but the other commentators said I'd made a grave error by skipping the first water station. But I was running the pack's pace. I wasn't running my pace. I wasn't running very efficiently, so I just said, you got to break out of this and find your own pace.
Just so you know, back when Joanie coached at BU, occasionally I'd do an interview with her, and for my radio show, and we go for a run along the Charles River. And then afterwards, people always say, well, what kind of pace does Joan like to run at? And I said, usually one that does not include others. Because she would just keep turning that screw and turning the screw, and I just want to throw away the tape recorder. But it was a fantastic day. Well, your parents, your family was in the Coliseum, is that correct? Like you came up to them afterwards? And your mom, what'd your mom say to you?
My mother, when I did my victory lap, was on the front rail and on the far side and said, "Now can you quit?"
That's the state of women's running back then.
I said, no, I have a few goals I still want to accomplish, one of which was trying to run a sub-2:20 mile, which never happened. But that led to storytelling, which has motivated me to this day.
Well, that's another whole story when Ingrid Christensen and Joanie matched up in Chicago in 1985. And the story I just will tell you is that they both prepped with the 10K. You were at Bonnie Bell, Tufts, whatever they called it back then, the Boston all-women's race. And Ingrid was in Itasca, Illinois at a 12K race. And Joanie ran like 31:49 for 10K. Ingrid ran like 31:51:52 for her 10K split through the 12K. Afterwards, we talked to Ingrid and said, what are you going to do in Chicago? She says, if I can hit 33:20 for the first 10K, that's 5:20 per mile pace, that's sub-2:20 marathon pace. We asked Joanie afterwards, Joe Kincannon and I from the Boston Globe, what are you going to do in Chicago? Run how you feel or run how you on splits? We knew the answer. And she said, what's a split? So I said, Ingrid went into Chicago to break 2:20. Joanie went into Chicago to break Ingrid. And there's the difference between a runner and a racer. Ingrid was a great runner, but you could break her if you stayed on her backside long enough. And Joanie was like the most willful, the greatest racer. The 3-4 people we've got here were racers. They weren't just runners. But that's another. We could do clinics forever with all these people.
Well, that was my bad because we were racing neck and neck, and the late Barry Brown, we passed at about 10K, and he had this look of disbelief that we were actually passing him, who was a great masters runner and unbeatable in his age categories. And I said, I am going to stick with Ingrid till 10 miles, and if she doesn't, fall back by 10, I'm falling back because I can't keep this pace. And she fell back, and I'm notorious for not looking at marathon race courses or any race courses before I run. That is the one time I wish I'd looked at the race course, because all of a sudden, thinking Ingrid might come back, there was the finish line. And I still had quite a bit left in the tank.
Oh, and that was the American record, which lasted for 18 years until Dina broke it in London in 2006.
Yeah, and I think Dina just screwed up my race for tomorrow because I saw her out on the bike path this morning. So I was only going to run 4
Let's
or
bring
5.
Billy up here. Will Ha? Frank was talking about it, Bill, and it's one thing we don't really see in the sport today, and I think that's something that's in many ways hurting the sport. The activity of running has boomed for a long period of time, but the racing has not been the focal point. I go back to 1980 when Rod Dixon was the first non-American to win the men's race. 44th place was sub 5-minute pace.
Yeah.
It was like the middle class has sort of gone away a little bit, but the rivalry between Frank Shorter and the Colorado Track Club and Bill Rogers and the Greater Boston Track Club was exemplified by Herb Lindsay, who was, I think, second or third in this race in 1980. And Herb said, I could not have done what I did without the other 20 guys at the Colorado Track Club. And we could not have done as a group what we did without knowing that Billy and Greg Meyer and Mike Roach and Randy Thomas and Bobby Hodge were doing what they were doing at the Greater Boston Track Club. So everyone elevated everybody else, and the rivalry wasn't media made up, it was real.
Yeah, I mean, competition develops more competition. But I sort of take, if you take a look at the top runners of today in the U.S. or worldwide, and wheelchair racers as well, it keeps going up. And this is just the way it is. It's great because when you look around the room here, there's a lot of little kids, and they're the future, of running.
But how do you get? Those rivalries. There were Frank guys.
Yeah.
There were Frank people and there were Billy people. And it's like, you want somebody, you need a black hat, you need a white hat. You want somebody to win as opposed to, oh, that's interesting,
we
but
did
I
have
don't
a good
care.
rivalry.
You want to care.
But yeah, absolutely. But I think everyone does. I love seeing the more people out there, the better. Because that's what it's a better world. And it's a better U.S. too. And this is global, so it's all over the world. So I think we all had fun. We did. We got our butts kicked. She hardly ever got her butt kicked. But Frank and I had some really great duels. And but you did with Greta and Ingrid, Rosa Moda. But I think this sport is the greatest sport in the world. But I think it's the most competitive, and not everyone understands that yet. I think that's going to happen. Maybe. I'm always looking on the super bright side when we're going to be there with the other sports. And I think it's happening now because this past year on ESPN, the sports network, I saw cross country. And I saw Connor Mance and the young woman from Brigham Young University win our national cross country titles. Craig, you know about cross country. You have 2 gold medals, world cross country. But when you see that grassroots sport, which we all took part in too as kids, that's the future, all our kids, So, and that sport is booming. When ESPN starts covering our sport, that's a sign they see. And I think it's when women came in, which Joan, Patty Dillon, some other really strong-minded individuals went for it. They went for it and changed people's minds. The way Tatiana's doing now, and the way Bobby Hall and Jack Coakley did way back here at Falmouth, Boston, New York. Tough thing. Bobby Hall couldn't get into the New York City Marathon when he wanted to go there. I was telling Tatiana the other day.
Tatiana, why don't you roll up here? Tatiana McFadden, everyone, who is a 5-time Falmouth champion.
Thank you.
And a 20-time Paralympic medalist. She just won a couple of gold in Tokyo, did you not? And just last year. Falmouth was, again, the Boston Marathon started wheelchair racing for the marathon. Falmouth was one of the very first, and Bob Hall was really the pioneer. He was good friends with Billy. And Will Cloney, the race director of the Boston Marathon, said if you can break 3 hours in that race in 1975 or was, you would be able to get a finisher certificate. And he was in a regulation hospital every day walking around wheelchair. There was nothing fancy about that chair. And he went and he pushed a 258. And that really opened the door. And he had his Greater Boston Track Club singlets. He represented athletics. It wasn't taken as isn't this wonderful? It wasn't meant to be inspirational. It was meant to be competitive. And I think that's what's changed. throughout your career, the seriousness with which people take your sport has risen. That's what's risen a lot. Is that true?
Absolutely. I'm so honored to be on the stage with the absolute legends. And, when you're talking about the history of Falmouth, I'm very grateful that Bob Hall was friends with you, Bill, because you became an ally. And running community is about building allyship and that friendship. I also compete on Team USA for track and field, and you don't get the same relationship like you do in road racing. And so when I raced, Boston for the very first time, the community was just absolutely amazing. And I wanted more, and I wanted to talk more about marathoning and how we race the race and how we train and educate people about wheelchair racing and educate people about disability. And I think that's why the sport has grown. I think that's why we've gained so much respect, because people are in awe. You know, for wheelchair racing, it's all upper body. We don't have gears. It's our power and our strength, how we're going to get up those hills, how we maintain the speed. And our training is very similar like to any other marathoner. We do about 100 miles or more a week, and we lift either 2 to 3 times a week just to maintain our strength. And so it's amazing to see the growth in our sport to when I started marathoning in 2009 to what it is today. I mean, we've increased media, we've increased prize money, we've increased followers, and it's been amazing.
Well, the Abbott World Marathon Majors several years ago finally included the wheelchair division in their series championship, and that elevated the sport as well. I want to bring up our last guy, Craig Virgin. He's been sitting there. Craig Virgin, 1979 Boston Marathon champion, 3-time Olympian, really was a cross-country and track man. He was the dominant Big Ten athlete in his day. I mean, he would just wax people. But Frank and Craig had many battles on the track. Craig was the young up-and-comer, and Frank was the reigning king. But I know that, Craig, that your eyes were just opened wide by your first experience here at the Falmouth Road Race. You went on to win in your second attempt, but the first time you came here, again, you were kind of a newbie to American road racing, and it kind of caught you by surprise.
So I had been fortunate that I was with Bill Rogers on the World Cross Country team that year in Glasgow, and I'd been hearing about this road racing, and he was kind enough, every time we had a dead time, he'd tell me about the industry and what was going on and how he conducted himself, and he was giving me tips. I always will remember, Frank gave me little tips, but I had Bill more concentrated periods of time that I could ask him, well, what's going on with this road racing in the Northeast? You know, what is this? You know, and because all the road races where I came from, they had 100 people or less. Sometimes the first person had to stop the stopwatch and time everybody else, or to give out the tongue depressors, okay?
Popsicle sticks, right.
And so our road races in the Midwest were nothing like what they were doing here. This was the epicenter of road, and I know they had beta breakers in San Francisco, but that's kind of a different race.
Well, the Boston Marathon was the granddaddy of them all, and that was like that was the thing, the line that fed through it. And it was New York, actually. It was the state of New York and New England, which really was, you know, the epicenter.
And so in '78, in March, I'm in Glasgow. We're riding on buses, and I keep picking his brain about how to handle. I said, I know I'm a pretty good distance runner. I'm doing cross country. We were on the world team. And I said, you know, road racing is just like cross country, except it's on the roads, you know?
Tell them we took the silver medal for the U.S.
Well, and our team that year took the silver medal in the World Championships, and Bill was a big contributing factor to that. I was the second American. I was sixth. We had 2 guys in the top 6, and Bill, where were you?
I was way back.
Bill was third in '75, though, got the bronze medal in Morocco.
But what I'm saying is that I just looked at road racing once I got to Falmouth and was chasing him and him at another year. I looked at road racing just like a cross-country race on the streets, and that's how I treated it. And I felt like the speed work in track would help me for these very fast road races, and that's kind of how I treat it. Now, I grew up with Joanie I'm 60, are you 64? 65. So Joanie's just a little bit younger than me, but ladies and gentlemen, I grew up with Joanie and Mary Decker Slaney. And so these were women that trained like men. Right. And so, I mean, they trained just like a guy did. Nobody was, you know, cutting things back for them or handling them any softer. And so for me, I was exposed to, I saw women's running growing, but these were my role models. These are who I referenced, and they trained like a man did. And they trained with us sometimes.
It's a two-way road, because if it hadn't been for these guys, I mean, I remember being in France with appendicitis, thinking I'd had about water, when he won the World Cross Country Championships in Longchamp, and he was a rock star. And these were the role models. This was just after Title IX, and there wasn't a lot of room for women in sport up until that time. But these guys were great mentors, and you know, I'll always credit them for giving me the confidence and the faith to go. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. And we were acceptive. We had no problems. Joanie was like one of us. And so was Mary Decker-Slaney when we had the opportunity, but she was more focused on the track meets than Joanie was on the cross country.
Runners are runners. They're not tall, they're not short, they're not wide, they're not black, they're not white, they're not men, they're not women. They're runners. And so when you're running with someone, they're just a runner. If you're racing with someone, I could sort of get close to Joanie at the 10K mark, and remember at the Purity Supreme 10K mark, she beat me at the end. She's not bad for a boy, she said to me. But I said I was a pretty good female runner. Sadly, I was an adult male at the time. But the point is, when you're racing against, no matter who you're racing against, they're just a racer. They're nothing else more than that. And so if you're going all out, you're just going all out. We do want to get some questions from the crowd if they want. Anyone got a question? We could go on, but if you guys have a question, anybody? Don't feel shy.
If you don't, Tony, I'd like to talk about the thing that really appealed to me about road racing in America. When I was in the track meet, we had the 100-yard dash, the sprinters, the hurdlers, the field event people. The middle distance and distance was a small part of it. But in road racing, it was all distance runners. So everything was about distance running. And we were the stars. We didn't have to share the limelight with anybody. And also in track, you didn't have people come down from the stands to run the 10,000 meters with you, or the 5,000, or the 3,000. And in American road racing, they could come down and run with you, and they appreciate what you were doing. And I think that's one of the magic appeals that we had in the early to mid to late 70s and 80s, was it brought people in that weren't, if you can pardon my, they weren't doing it for charity. They were coming to learn to run, and they wanted to run fast, and they were serious, but they also had their heroes, and they followed people like up here, okay?
The fundraising side of our sport is huge. I think we rival golf nationally. Golf's on TV a lot. We're not on TV too much, but we're getting there. We're getting there. And the young Americans are going to do it, and the young athletes from around the world, because this is global competition. I don't think golf's even as competitive as this sport. So that's what you're talking about. But I think this sport, the fundraising is important because it gives you a drive. You know, I was hit with cancer myself about 10 years ago. My partner Karen works in breast cancer imaging. She was hit with cancer. This is a way to build the sport and protect everyone's health. You know what I mean? You're a little older.
Yes.
We're a little older. We think about our health more, and that's something that I think it's been hidden in the U.S. And I think we're all good people to be out there, no matter what your age, and men and women. Not every sport has that. Let's face it. You know what I mean? So we have everything in this sport. I think it's coming along. I hope in the next 50 years, will we be here?
I want to know if anyone has a Tommy story. I mean, Tommy was really the godfather of the thing, and he was he's a good friend to all of us. Who's got a Tommy story?
Who's got a Tommy story? Frank or Bill?
Turn that thing up there.
The Tommy story is, Tommy watched the 72 Olympics, and then Tommy was truly, and I've said this before here, truly one of those people who could get, in a good way, other people to do things for him that most people cannot do. There was a certain trust element about him that you just realized he was really, really serious about what he was doing, and that he gave off the aura that he could accomplish his goal with your help. And he was very good about finding specific people who were very good at certain niches of labor that were necessary to put things on. He could just do that. So when he convinced Bill to write me a letter asking me to come down here to run, Bill said, okay. And so I get the letter, and I go, sure. And to reflect, how it was at that point in time. I kept talking about cooperation. I hadn't met, I'd known Bill from racing, and in 70, but in 75, when you had the great cross country race and then ran Boston so well in the early spring, I said, I want to run against him. Not because I particularly wanted to beat him or finish ahead of him, but I wanted to run with him. And the way I always put it is to find out, to just find out where I was in relation to where he was in terms of what we were all trying to do. And again, so it wasn't so much of trying to win a race, but to find out where you would be in that race and not be afraid to do it. And Bill was talking about that, now, with the shoe company involvement and the agents and the coaches, and people being so selective about rankings and trying to avoid, any impact on one's income. We didn't have that. All we had was wanting to show just how, and find out for ourselves how well we could do.
And in doing so, you elevated one another.
Yeah, and both of us got better doing it. And so I came down, and I was lucky enough to win that race, and then I won the next one, and then Bill won after that, and it was sort of okay. And we always, because we wanted to know where we were. And again, and here we are now. And I think that speaks very well, too, the fact that we can be still out here at least doing this. And tomorrow, and one of the things when you said about the impact of the sport, I never thought I'd get to a point where I could actually get pleasure tomorrow. For example, I'll be starting in the front pack, and I'll be running along, and a ton of people are going to go by me. And so they had me record something for people to get off the bus. When they go down there on the bus, there's going to be a recording. And my recording was, I sort of introduced myself and gave a little history, and I said, and I know so many of you people who are behind me are going to pass me. All I want, if you recognize me, all I want is for you to tell me I'm looking good when you go by. Okay? That's all I want. And because again, it's sort of an extension of that team spirit. They understand how hard, and isn't that interesting? They understand how we're trying hard, and we're going slowly. And so I think that's something that at least we can.
Well, at least 7 miles.
Do that. Yeah.
That's meaningful nowadays.
Not done that yet,
Yeah,
though.
and Joan's going to finish ahead of us, by the way. So don't bet on either of us with regard to Joanie. Okay?
Joanie, give us a Tommy story. What I mean,
I'll
you
give
spent your time you spent
Tommy's
some time in the
story.
LA Lounge.
But just an addendum to that, I go back in the pack until I find a group of people who say they'll block for me until the pack thins out a little bit, because I'm just afraid I'm going to get trampled. But Tommy, I think I endeared myself to Tommy because he found out that my mother was Irish and she grew up in Newton, Massachusetts. So when we came down for my first Falmouth, I'd met him, at the Elliott Lounge, the favorite watering hole. And he always took care of me when I came in. He even sat me down in Dennis Eckersley's lap. And, I was a big Red Sox fan. I mean, I go way back with the Red Sox. The first fundraising event I had was for the Jimmy Fund with a carnival in our neighborhood because of the sign in Fenway Park. And then my husband only married me because I could name the whole starting lineup in the 1967 team. But with these guys and knowing them and knowing Tommy, I mean, I felt like I was part of the mob in Boston, so to speak, the running mob. But he was just a dear, dear friend. And Joe Kincannon, who wrote for years with the Boston Globe, they were buddies. And, I remember they came up for a big event that was going on in Maine. And just the fact that he did have the opportunity to meet my Irish mother, even though he was adopted. He was not born into Irish ancestry, but he adopted it very quickly with his his family in Westwood, where in
Yes,
Westfield.
That's on. It's on.
I'd also, again, I got drifted away from the Tommy Leonard story. Okay, it wasn't here. Tommy also started a race years ago, Mount Holyoke, in Massachusetts.
St. Patrick's Day.
What?
St. Patrick's Day road race.
Yeah, St. Patrick's Day road race out there. So I flew into Bradley Field, and Tommy comes and picks me up at the airport in a limousine. I mean, when limousines were really limousines. You know, the doors open this way, and there are little fold-out seats and stuff. And so I get in the limousine, and Tommy's in there, and the seats that fold up are folded up, and there's a cooler with a case of beer in in the limousine.
That's
Tommy was ready for the trip. You know, it was a long trip. It was probably like an hour. And so that was Tommy. He just had an idea of doing the right thing at the right time.
Billy, I remember.
Yeah, Joanie said he took care of his friends.
In 1977, Bill was the top guys didn't run in 76 because of the Olympic trials and the Olympics. So Billy won in 75, didn't run in 76, then came back in 77 as the Olympian and the favorite in the race, defending his 75 American run. But it was a warm day, and Jerome Drayton, the great Canadian Olympian, a former Fukuoka Marathon champion, beat him. And Bill dropped out of the race around Heartbreak Hill, I believe. But you ended up, tell that story. Where'd you end up after the race?
Well, my favorite place, actually, I dropped out 3 times at Boston. And I think a lot of people never want to drop out. I was telling Karen, my partner here, who pushes herself, she ended up in the medical tent once. And so this is a hard sport with Mother Nature ruling. So for a lot of beginners, sometimes overdo it. And Craig, you've had issues that way as well. Having one kidney was very dangerous. But I went to the Elliott Lounge, Tommy's place, and
Didn't go to the finish, went to the bar.
this is before John Hancock stepped in and made the Boston Marathon more professional and everything, which is something we athletes always wanted to have happen, and to have the earlier start, and also to have that happen at the Falmouth Road Race. So we all can celebrate a little easier, because it started later in the morning when we did it originally. Craig, I think when you won here, 78, it was like 79.
You won in 78.
Yeah, 79. But it was hot like that. You remember that?
It was just a special time with, and your point was about the.
Well, you fought a lot of health injuries.
Yes, and Alberto was behind us, and he had that. I guess he ran himself into some version of heat stroke of some kind.
Yeah.
And that's when they found out that they really had to have sports medicine people here.
They gave him last rites.
Right. And so all of these things were important. Part of the sport. I also want to say that, I want to point out that our sport, Tony, accepted women better and faster than other sports. And I also want to say that we incorporated wheelchair athletics with Craig Blanchett, Tatiana here, sooner than other sports did. I think that we can all be proud of our sports. When they talk about being inclusive, what's more inclusive than track and field and road racing and cross country?
Most basic of sports.
You know, it's harder wheelchair and cross country, but road racing and track, we've got wheelchair athletics, we've got female, and now, well, back in my early days, the longest race for women in the Olympics was either 800 or 1500, and then it got up to 3,000 or 5,000, and then in '84, as Joanie can attest to, we got to the marathon, and then the 10,000. So pretty soon, the women had everything the men did, and that's the way it should be. And that's another beauty. I think we can take pride in our sport, Tony, for having been front of all the athletics. We're one of the front runners with that. Maybe tennis is not bad, golf to a certain degree, but we did it before they did.
Yeah, I think everyone understands that you go find pain. I mean, racing hard hurts, and you go find pain and hold on, and it feels the same if you're a man or it's a woman. Pain's when you hurt down to your gut, you feel it, and gender had nothing to do with it.
Let me also say this, that what made us grow in the 70s and the 80s was the media coverage. In track meets, distance runners didn't always get much in the way. They got maybe one paragraph. But in road races, the whole thing was about a distance race, and it captured the imagination of the media, the newspapers, the radio, the TV stations, and that was a big part of our early growth, and still is going to be important to us, although the media is changing now.
Joanie talked about Joe Kincannon from the Boston Globe. His first Boston coverage was 1967, the year that Catherine Switzer, they tried to take the number off her chest, and it was very famous. The pictures went all over the world. But the man before Joe Kincannon at the Globe was Jerry Nason. And for 50 years, he was the head of the sports department at the Boston Globe. And he's the guy that coined the term Heartbreak Hill in 1936 at the Boston Marathon, when Tart Ellison Brown was leading the race, and Johnny Kelly, the elder, came by him on that hill, went by him and thought he had him, and he patted him on the backside like, "Good job, son, I'll take over from here." But that little pat on the backside sort of spurred Tarzan on, and he beat him. And the next day in the newspaper, Jerry Nason referred to that hill as Heartbreak Hill. And so you went from Jerry Nason for 50 years until 1966, covering the Boston Marathon, as sports director of the Boston Globe, promoting the event from January through April. And then Joe Kincannon was the chair of the Boston Globe, like Neil Amdur was with the New York Times. And these were very important people because they really were very professional writers. And the Globe and the New York Times and papers like that had beat writers that followed the sport, just like the beat writers for the Red Sox and the Patriots and the Bruins and the Celtics. And a little bit that's changed. We don't have beat writers. Well, we don't have newspapers for that for that point. But the sport is still, it's sort of coming back in the media. There was good coverage of the World Championships in Eugene, Oregon. You could go find the Commonwealth Games were just a couple of weeks ago in Birmingham, England, and they did a very good streaming job of that. We're going to be on NBC 10 streaming live in the race on Sunday morning. So there is good media. There's been good media. There's room to grow in media, but the sport deserves it because, as Billy said, these are great athletes who train just as hard as any other athletes do, and they deserve the rewards and they deserve the attention, and that brings kids into the thing.
And Tony, these are the athletes representing the United States in international competition, and they're really, really good. The Ethiopians and Kenyans are phenomenal. So are our athletes, but the more support they have, the better they do. And I think we all had support in different ways, so we were lucky.
Tatiana, let me ask you about the young people coming up. One of the things that's changed a little bit from your day is that you just have push rim wheelchairs. Now there are the hand cycles, and the hand cycles make it a little bit easier for people who get injured as opposed to having born this way. It's easier to work with a geared machine, and we saw a little bit of drop, I thought, in the push rim division. How is that dynamic changing now? Are we seeing a good young people coming into the game?
Yeah, as we talk about, celebrating 50 years of racing, here's to the next 50, and the difference between, technically speaking, the difference between hand cycles and wheelchair racing is that hand cycles have 21 gear speeds, right? And in wheelchair racing, we don't have any speeds. It's all upper body. So it is two different things at that point. As you're looking for recovery, yes, hand cycles is the way to go for recovery exercise, absolutely. But we want to make sure that we continue to talk about the wheelchair racers because LA, we're hosting the games in the United States, LA 28. And if we can have an impact in track and field, and if we can have an impact in road racing, we need more numbers in marathons. We need more Team USA running in marathons, because if we're stronger from right now to LA, hopefully we will take home first, second, and third in the marathon, and that's what we want, right? So we need the marathons to make sure that we step up the game and to step up the competition. The men's field is packed, but I'm really worried about the women's division. And so I see young athletes coming out, and we want to grab those 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds who can run a major marathon soon.
Well, it takes years to build that aerobic base. I mean,
Exactly.
it doesn't happen in 6 months. it takes years and years to develop an athlete.
Right, and we've had to start many years ago. When LA won that bid, that's when I had to become more of an advocate to make sure that by LA, that man or woman is 18 or maybe 20 years old, and they're competing for Team USA either on the track or on the road. And in the future, I foresee and I foreshadow that we will have trials at the same time, and I will see world championships for us at the same time and same place. But we have to continue to be advocates, and here are my allies. We're standing together up here talking about road racing and the history of it and how far it's come, and to the next, 30 to 50 years. And it's important, and I enjoy it, and it's exciting. I mean, the competition has picked up so much, and it's really exciting to be alive and to be an athlete right now competing.
Well, these are the greatest advocates the sport has created, that's for sure. So let's give them a big hand. They're going to hang around and sign autographs and stuff. So thanks for joining us.